Okay, well, why don't we get started? Welcome and thank you for joining us today to hear about this important topic of aligning identity and values with our careers. My name is Michelle Rapp. I work in the Office of Alumni Relations, and I organize these kinds of career programs, whether it's webinars or in-person events, networking events for alumni, and students are often invited to join us as well. And I also oversee the NU Source networking platform, which is available to you to make connections with fellow alumni. I'm very excited today to have Roshni Lal as our speaker. I was able to hear her present a similar program, and it was a very interesting and valuable session, and it led me to want to invite her to speak with us today. You'll hear that she has a lot of passion and experience both in the career services world as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a love for learning, as you'll hear with her background as well. Roshni has dedicated over 20 years to educating and serving various populations in higher education, K through 12, museums, and the U.S. military. Currently is the Assistant Director for Alumni Career Services for the West Coast with Syracuse University. She lives out her passion for providing people with career enhancement and professional development experiences through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. She also serves as the Director of DEI for the Mountain Pacific Association for colleges and employers. Also outside of the career services background, she also has designed exhibitions and educational programs for the Smithsonian Institute and the National Institutes of Health. And she served as a civilian career counselor in Seoul, South Korea for US military members. Roshni has earned a PhD in higher education and student affairs, as well as a certificate in women's and gender studies from Claremont Graduate University, an MA in Museum Studies from the George Washington University, and a BA in Anthropology from UCLA. So lots of experience to draw from. One thing, if you're up for it, is we'd love to have you have your cameras on so that we can feel like we're more of an interactive community here. So I'm going to turn it over to Roshni.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and hello, everyone. I'm excited to see all the black boxes around the room, as Michelle mentioned. If you are amenable to it, it'd be great to see some faces. Even when I share my screen, I still like to look to the side and see if I have some smiles or some head nods, especially when we do the Q&A at the end. But I would like to thank Michelle for this invitation to speak with the Northeastern community today. I always feel honored when someone invites me to share any knowledge or dare I say expertise. I'm okay to go ahead and say that. And just to be able to help us all grow, help us all discover our strengths, discover what makes us happy, and discover how we can ensure that we're holding our identity sacred as we go through our career journey. And your career journey is lifelong and ever evolving, as is your identity. So we always want to do a check-in to make sure that we're on the path that aligns with who we are and what brings us joy, but also what is meaningful. And most important, what can also give us the money that we need to live our lives and provide for our family. So let us not forget about that essential component as well. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off the presentation. Please feel free in the chat if there's anything that you hear that resonates with you, or you feel like you just wanted to respond in a certain way. Please type a comment in the chat, type a question in the chat. Love to see that engagement happening throughout as well. And I don't want anyone to forget a thought or a question they might have had come up while they heard me speaking about something in particular. Okay, great. So we're good. We can all see this home slide. All right, get some thumbs up there from, all right, perfect. So I add the word story here to the slide deck, aligning your identity and values with your career story, because that's really what it is. And that's really what we all have and what we all would like to share. Or at least I encourage you to share your career story. I'm going to skip over this slide. Michelle already gave me an amazing introduction, but just stressing the fact that while in education, I have held various roles in different capacities, and this ties into what I mean today about ensuring that your identity aligns with your career path, because it is going to change. And while I started out in the museum space and transitioned to higher ed, and I also was a civilian working for the military living in Seoul, South Korea, all of those roles were still rooted in giving back. And that is a part of my cultural identity, which I will be sure to share my story at the end. Folks will always say to me, I wish you shared your story at the start. And I said, but I want to make sure we get to the information first, and then we can get to the story time after that. So I want to start off with right here what it says, the real talk. When we're talking about career exploration and career engagement, I do want to point out to folks that these career theories and career methods and approaches were started by white European males, which means that the ideologies and the methodologies are rooted in one type of culture and one type of view. So when career coaches started out, they would counsel folks from one lens. And that's not helpful to people from any community other than the white European community that it was rooted in. So as a career coach and as somebody who's receiving career services and receiving career counseling, I encourage people to realize that we have to approach it in a way that's inclusive of everybody. We need to consider what influences people's paths, what influences their daily decision making, whether that's with career or just life in general. And culture has a lot to do with that more often than not. And so the lens that I like to look at is that culturally inclusive lens. I just completed my PhD in December of 2022, and my dissertation topic and research was on providing culturally inclusive career services for Pacific Islander students in higher education. And so we're looking at these theories. I'm thinking folks really need to be aware of this, not just, as somebody who is disseminating counseling, but again, as you are the person receiving it, because you need to be an active participant in that role. You need to be an informed and engaged participant in that process of discovering your own career path. So just remember to take into account what are all of the factors that influences what kind of job we want to have, what kind of career we want to have, what kind of a life we want to have, where do we want to live? Is it culture? Is it your race? Is it your ethnicity? Is it your gender? Is it your orientation? All of these things, it can be that. And so we want to be able to take into account the wide variety of factors there. And just pointing out that ethnic and racial minorities do hold the highest percentage of lower skilled and lower paying jobs. I know that sounds like a weird juxtaposition there, but higher percentage of the lower skilled, lower paying jobs, and have the highest unemployment rates in the country. So we have work to do. I won't delve into this too much, but I do like to show folks, for my personal standpoint, when I approach counseling for career services, I'm looking at this lens that does take into account people from a variety of backgrounds. So I'm using this lens about you being able to construct your own story and construct your identity, and being able to tell your story, talk about your identity, and then use that to be able to explore your career endeavors and explore your career interests. I also really use relational cultural theory, which is that both parties involved have to gain that trust and that mutual respect. And we're taking into consideration everybody's backgrounds, and again, what influences their decision making. So it's not just one person talking and saying, I know everything and here's my advice and you follow it. It's more about the questions of what's important to you, what's meaningful to you, what matters to you, and why does it matter to you? That's also just as important as what is the why. And let's see how we can build that into finding a career that makes you happy to get up every morning, right? And that last one as well is important, the multi-contextual model for diverse learning environments. This takes into account the experiences that folks have on college campuses as it relates to their racial and ethnic climate on campus. And so oftentimes, I'm not sure how many students versus alumni versus grad students we have on the call, but if it's a good mixture, happy about that. But for alumni, and I work specifically in alumni career services right now, I used to be student facing, but we often find that it's hard for them to come back and trust us when we're saying we're offering alumni career services, because they might have had a negative or isolating experience while on campus due to the racial and ethnic climate. And due to discrimination and prejudice and other forms of that nature. So I also approach my design and delivery of my services. And even when I put a call out to make people aware that these services are available, I am taking into consideration these different theoretical frameworks because I have to think to myself, I need to build that trust. They might not have had a great time at school. So why would they think the university would help them as an alum? And that's where these frameworks come in. And that's where that lens comes in that I like to use to approach folks from different backgrounds. So when we're talking about these identities, and the last time I actually presented on this, Michelle was ACSN, I was thinking to myself, it could actually be dueling identities, like a DUELING. And I think I might switch that up tonight because it is a form of that. Not only juggling two identities, dual, but it's also dueling identities because you can find them in conflict with one another. If you happen to be from a group that doesn't represent the majority, or if you just happen to feel as though you're trying to sacrifice yourself when fitting into the culture of the workplace, then you're juggling these dual identities, or your identities could be dueling with one another. So I want you to, take a moment here and think about these questions that you see in front of you. And again, feel free to drop a response into the chat, jot it down on your own, however you'd like to do it. But how do you choose a career path that resonates with and respects your values, your beliefs, your identity? Of course, if you're a recent college grad, I know the goal is just, I got to find something because I don't want to move back in with my parents and let me just get a job right now. But I understand that. I was in that position too. There's sort of a desperation that happens. But I also, if you have the time, I also encourage you to be patient with it and to consider these factors that matter, because you're going to find yourself in an environment where you don't feel like you belong, where you might feel as though you're just unhappy because you've sacrificed your identity and your values. 6 months later, you'll still be looking for a job anyway, right? 6 months later, you're going to find yourself too miserable to want to continue. So let's try to be proactive and prevent that from happening at the start, and sit with questions such as these, because we do have our values, we do have what matters to us, what we believe in. Can we go there and feel safe? Can we go there and feel like we can be ourselves? Can we go there and feel like we can contribute? We're able to speak up, take initiative. So again, think about that. It's important. It's important to consider. It's not just a job. I know people will say your job's not your whole life, and it's not your work. It's not who you are. If you've heard that before, right? Your job is not who you are. So for me, I don't have a job, I have a career. So that's an important distinction as well. And my career has always been a reflection of who I am. And if you're doing this 9 to 5, and let's face it, a lot of us are doing that without those hours, outside of those hours, much more than that, then I really do hope it is a reflection of who you are, because that is a lot of your life that you are spending at something that people say it's not who you are. So for me, fortunately, I love what I do. Do I always love it? No. I mean, who wants to answer, 75 emails every day? But that's not the core of it, right? The root of it and the core of it is what brings me joy, to be able to know that I'm helping somebody discover their life's passion, their life's goals, and again, what aligns with who they are. So I hope you do find a role, and I hope you do have a role or find a role that you can say it's part of who I am. It's part of what I do. Because I aligned it with my identity, and I aligned it with my goals and my values. So we have some other questions here as well, just making sure, again, if you're a student or alum, for this applies to anybody. When we do make our decisions, like, how am I going to hold this sacred to my family, what they value, and the obligations that I have there, but also pick something that is special to me. Okay, good. I have a comment to me directly, so I'll save that in case I want it to be private, but I'm happy to speak afterwards. Michelle is going to hold some space in addition to the Q&A. If anybody wants to stay on after the Q&A, I'll be here as well, so we can have a little bit more of a private discussion if need be. But I will say that I am 45 years old. I just turned 45 last week, and I took my 9-year-old son to Legoland. I'm based in Los Angeles. We went down to San Diego. That's my happy place. I love it. I was more excited than he was. When the characters are walking around, you get to take pictures with them. And I bring this up because I just got my PhD in like I said, I was 44. And that took me 4 years. I went rather quickly, actually. But the last time I had a degree was a master's degree in 2003. I went back to school 20 years later because a lot will happen. And I'm glad I waited. Oh, trust me, there were days when I was thinking to myself, what am I doing with two small kids, starting a PhD program, working full time? How insane. I should have done this in my 20s when I didn't have my obligation. But you know what? It was the best decision I could have made because my professional experience up until that point contributed greatly to my academic experience. So my professional experience informed my academic experience, and my academic experience was informing my professional work. And I was able to do things like create these types of presentations, and then get accepted to present at conferences and be with you fine folks here today, right? So you may feel uncertain in the moment, you may feel uncertain when you're making the decision itself, but when you're in it, you just go with it and you will realize, okay, this was the right thing for me. As long as you continue to keep the identity and the values and the beliefs in that main view, as long as you're rooting your decisions in that, remembering what's sacred to you and who you are and where you come from, your decision can never stray too far into the wrong column, if you're going to hold that sacred. And so just something to think about. Research has proven and has shown that culture, identity, and race directly affect folks' decision-making, but specifically career decision-making, because again, they are having to consider, is this all about me and the individual, or is it about my family? So when I talk back, when we refer back to these career theories coming from the European, the white man standpoint, that's a very individualistic lens, right? And America is very much pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and it's every man for himself. We hear that saying all the time. Well, that's really how America came to be, and that's what that go 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 culture is all about, and why we don't have as much vacation as other countries, or parental leave as other countries. That's that American culture. So if you're coming from not the dominant culture, then how are you trying to exist in that society, and let alone that workplace? And so that's why I want you to think about this too. I come from a collectivist and communal culture. So every decision I make, whether it is with work or my daily life, is based on what's for the good of the community, the good of my family, the good of others. Of course, I'm not totally sacrificing. I'm not doing anything that's going to make me miserable. But my first thought is really community, because that's my culture. That's what I'm rooted in. So again, take a moment here to think about this question, and please drop it in the chat or share it later on, and think to yourself, yeah, why am I choosing this career path? Is it because my parents wanted me to? Is it because this is how I was raised? Is it because it's just ingrained in me naturally? And that leads us to more self-reflection and self-assessment. So when we're talking about aligning our identity and our values with that career story, I do recommend that folks answer these macro level questions, because all of these are actually related to an interview question. So when you can answer this type of foundational macro level question about yourself, you'll be able to better share your story in a cover letter and answer those interview questions with more confidence. For example, what positive things do people say about you? That's linked to that dreaded interview question. What's your best skill? What's your greatest skill? People don't like to talk about themselves, but I also want to encourage you to throw that out. Okay, because you want a job, you better get comfortable with praising yourself. That's what it's all about. So these questions are designed to help you approach that in a different way. Well, if I have a hard time talking about myself and saying what I'm great at, then what do my friends say I'm good at? And so I have a lot of clients will tell me, oh, well, my friends say I'm really good at listening. They come to me with their problems. And I'm thinking, active listener, perfect. You see that on a job posting all the time, right? And you have another one on here, what's your greatest fear? That's linked to, what's the skill set? They used to say, what's your weakness? But now it's what needs improvement, because we're not allowed to say words like weakness anymore. So, think about it that way. So yeah, if I'm afraid of something, does it connect with a trait or a skill set that I need to work on and improve upon? So again, I encourage you to sit with these questions, and Michelle, I will email the slide deck to you. So anybody who'd like the presentation, please contact Michelle, contact me. My email will be at the end of this. I'll put my email in the chat. I'm always happy to share these resources, because that's what it's all about. So more self-reflection questions, all of these relating again to what makes you who you are. So that whole piece the whole point of this, your identity, your values. And we're looking at this matrix down here. where you grew up, how you grew up, right? Socioeconomic status, your parents, your family's background, their education, their work, we first gen, all of this is contributing to what kind of experience you're having on campus, what kind of experience you're having afterward in the workplace, because these things, your identity will stay with you. As I said, that's going to carry with you wherever you go. And so how you are in a classroom, right? That's going to be how you are in the workspace. If you're feeling like there are microaggressions in the classroom and that's impacting your ability to perform, it's going to carry on to the workplace. There will be microaggressions in the workplace. It doesn't matter how many DEI trainings happen. This is just going to be what it is because human beings are who they are. So you're going to have to learn how to be true to you, so that yes, these instances are going to occur, but what am I going to do to protect myself? What am I going to do to help ensure my safety? Because the employer absolutely has a responsibility to you, no doubt, but you also have a responsibility to yourself. The world is going to be like that. And so, I do encourage folks to sit with these questions, because when you have that firm understanding of yourself, that confidence comes in. That will come across in that interview. It will come across in the workplace too. You want to make sure you're not someone anyone could take advantage of. You want to make sure they're not trying to lowball you on the salary. And we will get to all of that shortly here. This is so important, especially folks searching for jobs. I have all the time clients will tell me, I applied to 100 jobs last month and I didn't hear back from any of them. First things first, I'm going to say, all right, you didn't tailor your resume. That means you did not tailor your resume. So when I say tailor your resume, that means that you are taking the key terms from the job posting and plugging that into your resume as many times as you can in different places, so that you will be able to get past the ATS. I wasn't going to include this in this presentation today, but it takes me a couple of minutes just to tell you the applicant tracking system is a computer algorithm that most employers use to screen out their applications and screen out their resumes. The computer is just going through the resume and looking for key terms in it. Those key terms come from the job description. If it doesn't find enough key terms, it will not pass you on to human eyes. Point of the story. So when someone tells me I applied to 100 jobs, I know they did not take the time to tailor 100 resumes, because tailoring your resume for each job description is tedious and time consuming and irritating, but you have to do it. That's the day and age that we live in. So how do you ensure you are engaging in an effective job search? Right here. So that's the identity piece, and it's the priority piece. There's no point in applying to something out of state if you know for sure you can't move, right? So I'm trying to save people time. I'm trying to save people energy and effort. Make sure you have an effective, intentional job search by having your priorities listed, by having your goals listed out, your identity listed out, just so you know for yourself, this is what I'm going to focus on. And here's where I'm going to funnel most of my energy. Because when you're that spread out, when you are applying to 150 jobs, you've already spread yourself too thin, and that will come across in the interview, should you land one, because you tailored your resume, right? Links to these will be at the end of that presentation. So if you do want a copy of it, these are just different types of skills assessments and strengths assessments you can find online. Folks do find these helpful because people have a hard time saying, what is my greatest strength? What is my skill set? So you can do these online assessments, these little career tests here, and they can be fun. Sometimes they can be right on the mark. When I take those career tests, the number one actually result for me is always career counselor, and the next one is educator. And I say, yay. And then some of my clients will take the test and they'll tell me that they got air traffic controller, or they got a funeral home director, and they look at me like, what is that about? And so, okay, so I don't know, it's not perfect, right? It's just a computer algorithm based on your responses and your quick response on these things. And I will ask the folks, especially the funeral home folks, I'll say, would you consider yourself, I don't even like to use the words introvert or extrovert. I just say, do you consider yourself somebody who's outgoing, socially, like to engage with others? And 95% of the time, they'll tell me, no, I really like working on my own as an individual and just doing my own thing. And I'm telling them, well, your clientele at the funeral house is not talking back to you. So sounds like that's why the computer came up with that, because you don't want to talk to anybody else, work with anyone else, you do your own thing. Again, these could be very helpful. A lot of it does depend on how you respond to the questions that they ask. I find these sites, especially when you're engaging in career exploration, incredibly helpful because a lot of people, when I meet with them, they'll say to me, I don't know what types of jobs are out there. I don't know the titles to search for. I'm not sure I'm supposed to type in. And this is where these links come in, especially the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics. They have the occupational outlook, the handbook there online. And you can type in a bunch of things. They have so many categories as well. So again, if you don't even know what to type in, they've got all these categories, different industries, and then within the industry, you'll see the specific job title. And when you click on that, it'll explain this is what the job does, this is what the skills that are needed, the education, this is how many hours you can expect to work, this is the outlook, like is this industry going to continue to climb or is it declining? It'll also give you salary expectations. So again, for career exploration, these sites are great. Career One Stop, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, My Next Move, ONET, really helpful for people to get an understanding of the different types of jobs and different types of industries. Networking, I know everybody hears it and they kind of roll their eyes or they go, well, I don't know how to do that and I'm uncomfortable and where do I begin? I get that. So, okay, go to your career center, right? That's all. That's like the best advice I could give you. I know Michelle will be happy with that. If you're a current student, go to the student-facing career center. If you're an alum and your school has alumni career services, which I know it does because that's how I know Michelle, please make an appointment with your alumni career services office to understand what is meant by beginning the networking process. So I'm going to skip ahead to once you are engaged in the networking process. I really call networking relationship building because that's what it is. So please don't think of it as I'm going to talk to this person that I'm scared of because they're so experienced and they're older than me and they've lived more than me and they have all these fancy roles. That's not what that is. Okay, a relationship building networking, people want to say talk about finding a mentor. No, this is two people coming together who can contribute to each other in different ways. And that's what I want to encourage you to think about it in that way. You are also bringing something to the table. You may not know that, but when you engage with that person, you will. I am a mentor for UCLA and I love it. And every single year I learn something different from my mentee. And every time it's a transformative and enlightening experience. We are learning from one another. Of course, I know that they are seeking advice from me and I have that. But it's also just getting to know one another as people, getting to know one another beyond the career trajectory. And that's that relationship building piece. And I stress that because I hope that that helps you relax in this process, not to think of it as this formal networking, but think of it as getting to know people and building relationship that you want to sustain. So I do recommend this. The reason this is called a scorecard is when I invented this at my prior university, before Syracuse, it was actually like a game we did for the undergrad students, like who can get the most folks that they networked with and track that, and here's a prize. So that's sort of the incentive. But you can still use this, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or various software programs. Please keep track of your networking. Please keep track of the people that you meet. Where did you meet them? How did you meet them? What was discussed? And then how often are you engaging with them and in what capacity? Email, phone call, Zoom, in person. And keep these relationships active and well. It's a year later. I met you at that networking event at university. Maybe, I don't know, right? So keep those ones active and engaged, check in regularly, not to the point of annoyance, but just to keep it going so that when you need the reference, when you need the letter of rec, I still write letters of rec for folks I met 7 years ago asking me for a letter of rec for grad school, because they kept it going though. And even if that's LinkedIn, even if that's just connecting on LinkedIn and making a comment on one of their posts every so often, that person is going to be amenable to, oh yeah, I remember you. I'll write the letter of rec. I will serve as a reference on your job application. Sure. So that's why we call it that flip scorecard there at the last bullet you'll see. So it's like, how many people have I connected? How many people have I introduced, to and helped out? So remember, you're an active participant in this relationship. You are also contributing. So our career story and our identity and our values and our beliefs, what is this is about? So this is about, I know people say storytelling. I say story sharing. I just like that term better because the telling kind of sounds like everyone's sitting around a circle while I speak and you listen. Whereas the story sharing is we're all engaged in this together, right? I'm all about that reciprocity and the relationship building. This is essential for you to write your cover letter. So you might be thinking, what? They don't care about who I am, where I came from. They do. because your cover letter is not a repetition of your resume. And so, as I say, not to repeat yourself, I'll repeat myself when I say your cover letter is not a repetition of your resume. They have your resume. It is in front of them. They can read it. They do not need your narrative version of your resume. They need the narrative version of you. So back in the day, cover letters were exactly that. It was just a test to see if you knew how to write. That's what that was, writing skills. So yes, please write the narrative version of your resume so I know how you know how to write well. Nowadays, though, a lot of people do have similar experience, similar education. So people's resumes are looking quite similar, and it's harder for hiring managers, recruiters, hiring committees to discern then who should we bring in. Well, that's where the cover letter comes in. And I know you might hear that age-old, nobody reads the cover letter, or the cover letter is optional. Yeah, I can't predict which company is or is not. This could be true. Places that get 100 applicants for one job, they might not be reading the cover letter, but you never know. Also, please let this be known. This is a trick. When you see that it says the cover letter is optional, it is not optional. That is their way of saying who's going to make the effort to write the cover letter. Now, those people are going to immediately be considered over the people who did not write the cover letter. So keep that in mind. So your cover letter is your chance to share your story. Who you are, where you came from, where you're going, how you're going to get there, your identity, beliefs, values, your goals, how all of those align with the role and the organization. So you're doing your homework on the organization as well. You're dropping in their mission statement, you're dropping in their programs or projects that they might be working on. But again, the point is for you to tell a story. You start with something, a captivating hook. You want to draw their attention in. Not, I saw this posting on LinkedIn. They know where you saw it, whether it doesn't matter. They post it on a bunch of job boards. They don't care about that. They want to know, is this somebody we want to bring around the water cooler, the Zoom room? Are they going to be cool with us, spin in fun? Let's see who they are. Own your story. Folks are hesitant, right? They get a little bit nervous. I have a lot of clients, because I work in alumni facing, right? I will have people who are afraid of age discrimination, who are fearing racial discrimination. I understand that completely. Lack of experience. Folks who are doing a career switch or a career transition totally, go ahead and acknowledge it. Don't try to hide it. Don't shy away from it. You will get asked about it in the interview anyway. Should you land the interview, the same questions that they were reading your cover letter and had, they're also going to ask you that anyway in your interview. So I say you own your story, and this is part of that confidence that comes from knowing your identity and aligning your values, and you just be upfront and acknowledge it. An example, one of my clients said, I'm really afraid of age discrimination. And so the example down at the bottom is, in your cover letter, just drop that in. I realize that I am older than the traditional age of most applicants, but this means that I bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. Sets you apart. Real quick, you don't need to drag on about it. So you're not calling attention to yourself in a negative or lacking way. It purely is an acknowledgement. And then you're showing the positive side, you're showing the upskilling side. So I'm taking Excel classes, or, right? So these are the things that when I say be upfront, own your story. I'll give a quick example. When you apply to work in alumni services at any university, the first thing they'll do is check to see if you went to that university. So I did not go to Syracuse. As you heard, I went to UCLA, and I put right in my cover letter, like, I recognize I'm not a Syracuse alum. However, you are seeking somebody based in Los Angeles who can do employer engagement and career services, and that's what I do. So it worked, right? Because here I am. All right. So just again, be upfront, own your story. I drop this in. Sometimes I don't do this. I will give snippets of my cover letters for a little bit, but when I want to prove what the power of story sharing, this is legitimately the beginning of one of my cover letters. Legitimately the beginning of one of my cover letters. So I'll read it out loud. And this is the start of my letter. So, dear hiring manager, dear hiring committee, you can stop and sit down now. Why don't you continue your book report when you learn how to speak better English? This is what my father's high school teacher said to him, an immigrant from Fiji of Indian descent. My father shares that story often because it's what inspired him to become a teacher, a principal, and eventually a superintendent in inner city neighborhoods. He vowed to make sure any teacher under his watch would never humiliate and belittle a student the way that he was. My mother is of mixed heritage, and both her parents were deaf, That prompted her career path to commence as a special education teacher and then end as a retired professor emeritus of the School of Education at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Their stories, their choices, their trials, their triumphs instilled in me at an early age the great need to uplift those from systemically marginalized, intentionally underserved, and historically ignored communities. That's the start to a cover letter. You find your story, and you tell it, because I guarantee you that first sentence is going to make a person read the next sentence and the next sentence and the next sentence. And if they didn't want to read anymore after that, I don't want to work there. Now, I have the privilege to be able to say that because of where I am in my career now, today. I do have the ability and the fortune to say, not fortune, I wish, though. I am fortunate enough, right? I have to work toward a fortune. I am fortunate enough in a position to be able to say at this point in my life and my career that I don't want to work at a company that doesn't care about a story. Like if this story doesn't move them. I do talk about, I'm strategic though. There are certain cover letters where I absolutely mention my boys. I'm a mother of 2 boys, and I'm trying every day to instill in them the values and traits that it means to be a positive, contributing human in our society. That's exactly what I do in career services every day as well. So the reason I draw my sons in is because I'm doing this personally and I'm doing this professionally. It's the same type of work. I don't want to work at a company that doesn't want a working mom. So again, I'm in a position to be able to say those things. And I am strategic. So I will be upfront and honest with you. If I'm applying to Netflix, I'm not. But if I apply to a corporation, I'm actually not dropping in the sentence about me being a mother. If I'm applying to a nonprofit or working in education, I am dropping in the sentence about being a mother. It's a strategy here. Again, you have many components to your story, and it is up to you to choose how you want to tell that story. But I also wanted to include in here, that is my dad. Our newspaper here in our hometown here in LA did do an article on him. I know it might be hard to see, but Lal travels from the little village to the big city. So he was highlighted in that, the fact that he came literally from a village in Fiji and ended up being this amazing educator here in Southern California that he is. So don't shy away from sharing your story is my point, because a lot of my clients will say, they want, like how, I don't know what I should write. I don't know. And that is something that takes practice. So you will have to sit with yourself and write your story out. So I always say, again, start from that macro level, that foundational level, write a big story, and then you're going to keep tailoring it and tailoring it and tailoring it, depending on the role, depending on how you feel, depending on the company and what you feel comfortable with. Okay, the fun stuff. So whenever I enter this portion of giving people information, it's like people get mad. They're mad at me. Like, what do you mean women and minorities make less? And I'm like, I'm not responsible for that. And I didn't make up these stats. These are all from the U.S. Census Bureau. They do this annually. They take stock of how much folks are getting paid. It's from who and what and when, here and why. This is nothing new. We've had the racial reckoning happening in our society and across the globe for the last couple years now. Prior to that, I will tell you that people were very surprised because I teach the career course, and the students were surprised, the grad students were surprised to learn this information that absolutely women and women of color and then minorities of any gender make less, people of color make less than white males. And that's just the truth, and that's how it is. And every day we are working to rectify this, but you need to know it. Whoever you are and whatever demographic you're from, you need to be aware that this is what's happening. For every dollar a man makes, a woman makes 81 cents, right? And so people of color are holding lower paying jobs, lower skilled jobs. You always hear about the wage disparity, the wage gap, the pay gap, the salary gap. Let us not forget about the title and promotion gap. What do I mean by that? So women of color and people of color in general, they are holding roles that are not CEO, executive, senior leadership, right? Those roles, the majority of those roles, white men. The promotions, what happens more frequently to the higher title, white men. So you do need to know this and be aware of it and be informed of it. When you enter into your salary negotiation process, you need to know you're going into that. They're already going to lowball. Lowball is that term meaning they're going to try to offer you a lower salary because of what you look like, where you came from. These stats I'm showing you here, this is regardless of education and experience level. You have women who have even higher education level than men who are still making less than their male counterparts. You have people of color with more advanced educational degrees and experience who are still making less than their white counterparts. I don't need to answer the why. Okay, I'm not racism, discrimination. Okay, so I can't. That's where we are. That's the unfortunate of it. But I'm trying to help be a part of combating this by informing as many people as I possibly can about the situation. A typical salary negotiation, regardless of your background, is going to be the company saying, these are arbitrary amounts, right? The company saying 80,000, expecting you to say 90,000 so that they can say 85,000 and you call it a day. That's going to be a typical salary negotiation anyway. But if you're a white man, the company's going to say 100,000. And then if you're a woman of color, the company is going to start with 70,000 for the same role, offering that to the same education experience. So you have to be informed about this going in. So you're doing yourself justice here. This is about self-advocacy by being informed and being able to say, this is what I'm worth and this is my value. And those, if you really want to have a fun day, then you can go to pay scale. I'm being sarcastic because it is very depressing. I did not include the charts and graphs, the visuals that make everybody even more sad when you can visually see just the disparity that happens here. But pay scale, that link is where you can go if you do want more information on that. And then again, there's the cost of living calculator on pay scale. So this is how you make sure you have an informed decision, because people will say, well, how am I supposed to rebuttal with my salary? How do I know I can't prove that they're offering me less than they did the other person who looks different than me? That's correct. You absolutely can't. But you can go onto salary.com. You can go onto pay scale. You can look at stats to see what types of salaries can be expected for a particular role in a particular industry, for your type of education, your type of experience, what you should be being offered. And then you need to look at the location of the company and see what the cost of living is and calculate all that and roll that all into what the salary should be, plus what you are worth. A question there at the bottom. So from other cultures and countries, there is free discussion about salary. Only very recently are we seeing the laws now requiring public institutions to post the salary range. And sometimes even then, here's the salary range, 75,000 to 120. And you're like, what? That's not a salary range. That's the company not being very nice and just doing that because they have to by law, but they know they're still not giving you the exact idea or the exact range. For example, I have a friend who's from Germany, and she did say to me the other day, that's a good one. Angela, I like your question in the chat there. We'll get to that here after we just wrap up in a second. But I have a friend in Germany who say to me, so how much do you make? And I'm like, aghast, oh my gosh, how could you ask such a thing? And she's over here saying, what's the big deal? In Germany, everybody knows what everybody makes. It's not a taboo. It's not a thing. And so think about in America, though, why is it so taboo? You can't ask me what I make. I'm not supposed to ask you what you make. Just now in 2023, laws requiring countries to finally post what the salary range possibly could be. And that's just the range. Even then, you don't know the exact amount that was landed on for a particular individual. My take, it is a cultural construct. It is a form of oppression to keep people uninformed and in their place. I don't want you, woman of color, down the hall knowing what other person up the hall is making, because then you two are going to argue about it and I'm going to have to pay you more and the company's losing money. Is it evil? Of course. Is that a surprise? It shouldn't be. So, but because really think about it, why is it such a taboo to talk about salary, to know salary? Because these corporations, these organizations, truly, they don't want anybody knowing how much anybody else is making, because then they're going to have to make sure everyone's going to get the dreaded equal pay, right? Like a company's biggest fear is paying everybody equally. So this is all, why am I telling this? Be informed so you can advocate for oneself. Hopefully you can keep this in your mind here, that I know I've given you all this, like, it's not very uplifting information. It's sorry about that, but despite the reality that I have presented you here today, please do know that yes, the world is changing. Now it's almost like employers don't really have a choice. They've got to get on board. You see it happening, the battle between remote work and coming into the office. You see it happening now. Employers have to recognize their people as people, exactly that, not their staff, not their employees, but as their humans who are there, their community that's there working hard for them. You're going to have to respect where they come from, who they are, their identity, their values, their goals. So things have changed. So I really want you to know that you have value, you matter, you have your story. Do not be afraid to share that story in your cover letter, in your interview, during your salary negotiation, during the onboarding, while you are employed, just in any aspect of your daily life. This is you, this is who you are. Do not ever make anybody, let anybody make you feel less than, right? So just stay empowered, stay informed, stay empowered, so you can always engage in self-advocacy. So I know I'm looking at time here. I definitely want to address these questions, but I would like to share my story if folks are cool with that. So I do this on purpose. One, because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm over here telling you to share your story in every process of your job search, but it's also because there are so many different ways to get to where you're going. And I completely understand that you're going to have pitfalls, unexpected things will happen and occur. It doesn't matter how much you plan for something. So what I say is just be prepared. You always have these transferable, diversified skill sets in your pocket so you can be prepared. So I acknowledge off the bat, I grew up with privilege, very lucky for that. I grew up that way because both my parents did not, because they worked hard. As you heard, my dad was an immigrant in Fiji. He came here as a teenager, not really knowing much English, and worked his way up, worked in IHOP and the International House of Pancakes, and was working multiple jobs. As I said, my mom's parents were deaf. They were both one of 9 children, and they were both on the older of the siblings, so they knew what it meant to take care of one another. My mom's mom is from Trinidad and Tobago, and that's some Guyanese and some Chinese and that mixed in there. My dad is of Indian descent, but we never been to India. We have the clothes and we speak the language, we have culture and food, but we've never been there. We've only known Fiji. This is all thanks to the British and the colonialism, bringing everybody from around the world just to go work where they wanted them to work. This is also part of why we have the mixture that we do in Trinidad. And then my mom's dad was from Hungary and France, and her parents met in LA at a deaf organization. And they met and married at a time when it was still illegal to have interracial marriage. I say all this because even though I am from a place of privilege, I grew up in a coastal town of Southern California that is very affluent. I still know my parents' stories, and they ingrain that and their experiences and obstacles in us, and that we have familiarity with the legacy of colonialism, what it means to be marginalized, discriminated against, racism. So that is all there still, and I still experienced it being in an affluent community, a person of color. People make assumptions about me my whole life growing up. But I was able to go straight to UCLA, and then from there I went straight to GW, George Washington University in DC. And I did that because I had an internship as an undergrad. So for any students around the room, internships are the key. You will absolutely discover what you want to do with your life. Even more importantly, what you don't want to do with your life as when you do an internship. And I interned at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County before my senior year at UCLA. And that was it. I said, that's it. That's my life. I'm doing it. I'm an anthropology major. I want to work in museums and public programs and education. I got to do it. And so one of my professors, who was also my mentor at UCLA, I told him, I love museums and I love anthropology, and how do I combine this and what do I do? And then he walked me down the hall and we got out a book, these things that you flip pages, right? When I was an undergrad, the internet just started. So flipped the book and said, there's a program at George Washington University in museum studies, and you can also specialize in anthropology. And I was like, where's that? Washington, D.C. So this Southern California gal was like, what? You want me to go and live in the cold for 2 years? So I thought, education was so important to me. And I said, I'll do it. I'm just going to go for 2 years, get my master's, and I'll wear a coat and some boots. And then I'm getting out of there and I'm coming back to the beach. And I ended up living in DC for 7 years because I loved it. And so I say that too, because you may think you have an exact idea of this is how it's going to be, but please be flexible and be open to all these changes that will happen. So I did go straight to grad school. I did 2 internships at the Smithsonian, different Smithsonian institutions while I was in grad school. And I fell in love with DC. I made a bunch of friends. I landed, at the time, what was the dream job, because my goal was to go out there and work for the Smithsonian. And so while I interned there, I did end up working for the Smithsonian after I graduated. However, it took me 5 months to find a job after grad school. And that was a very dark time, because you think to yourself, hey, I thought I did everything I was supposed to do. I've done a million internships. I went to the premier program in the world, and I worked at the premier intern at the premier institution in the world in my field, and I still can't find a job because there's just no guarantees, there's no givens. But what I did do was I stayed volunteering at the Smithsonian. I made sure my presence was known there. Luckily, I had budgeted enough correctly so that I could continue to live in the city while I looked for work, but that was a struggle. The center of DC is not cheap. People always talk about LA, San Francisco, and New York. Throw DC in there. It's just about the same as it being expensive to live there. But from the volunteering, my volunteer supervisor said, there's this role opening up in the Education Museum Studies for Smithsonian. So because I had my presence there and I had my skill sets ready to go, I was able to land that role. And I did that for 2 years and I loved it. And I was a contractor. Back then, I was like 38 hours a week, which they could get away with so that they didn't have to pay you health insurance. This is what it was then. This is 2002, 2003. So I was living there paying my own health insurance, trying to budget my own 401k, right? I'm not paying, my salary wasn't paying into anything because I was a contractor. And after 2 years of doing that, they kept promising, we're going to bring you on full time. You're going to be a full-time employee. Don't worry. And sure enough, after 2 years, it was, okay, there's a government hiring freeze because the Smithsonian is a federal entity and we cannot bring any more full-time employees on, but you can still work for us. And it was heartbreaking because this is what I had my goal, the whole reason I moved across the country. But I knew I could not afford to be a contract employee anymore without benefits. And I had to make that very tough decision to leave that role at the Smithsonian. And it was a heartache, but it's something I had to do because the reality was I had to be able to eat. I wanted to stay in DC. So I switched tracks a little bit. I worked for an organization that did internships for students in DC. So I traveled around the colleges across the country, talking to students about this organization, come to DC, do an internship. And I was tasked with increasing their students of color and their students with disabilities. They just didn't really have that population the way that they wanted to. And so that was a passion for me because that mattered to me. Why aren't these groups, these underserved groups, the intentionally excluded groups in history, why aren't they getting those same opportunities? So I was happy to be able to do that. And I know we're running low on time. So the really quick wrap up is that 2 years of traveling around after that, I ended up moving to Seoul, South Korea, where a friend of mine was living. I was a career counselor for the military. And while I was there, I was able to teach anthropology for the University of Maryland. So my undergraduate degree did not go to waste after all. And then I ended up living in the state of Washington, had my 2 babies, came back down here to Southern California and worked at a university here and ran the career center. And now I'm at Syracuse. And along the way there, I got a PhD. Okay, so the point of the story is look at how many different things happened to me and how many unexpected things happened to me. But I made sure I had a diversified and transferable skill set. And I was prepared in different ways. And I just had to trudge along and trudge through. I also was a stay-at-home mom for 6 years, something I never expected I would do. That's that. My identity took a hit there for sure. And I also had to reassess going back to work and what that would look like. And here I am now. And every single thing that I do in my life is for my kids. So these takeaways are here. I talked about them already before. Just network. Don't ever let anybody make you feel less than. But this is why I do what I do. That's my family. That's my mom and dad. That's my brother. And these are my babies. And it's a whole nother story to talk about the fact that they are white presenting and what that feels like when I go out in public. And people actually say to me all the time, are you their real mother? Are you the nanny? Are you the babysitter? That's a story for another day. I'm happy to share that with you if you'd like. But this is why I do what I do right here. Okay, those links, and that's it. And that's my email. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And let's get to the question. So I will address the questions in the chat. Okay, so let's see, Angela, did this still happen if a woman of color? And also, if you'd like to unmute and ask me, then feel free to do that right now as well. Does this still happen if a woman of color, the HR person with whom you negotiated your salary? In this case, would you still have been lowball? Yeah, because the HR is taking the directive. Even if the HR wants to, they could want to do something, but they're taking their directive from the hiring, the person who's actually going to be hiring for this role. So agreed upon salary range, it actually happens in a twofold way. So HR is going to say, this is the range, and then they'll offer you what they've been authorized to offer you. You can come back with it. They will go back to the supervisor, person who will be your supervisor. And even if the supervisor does say something like, just give them 90,000, if HR is if it's too high above what HR knows is equitable throughout the whole institution, they still do have the final say to come back down and say, well, no, it's 85,000. But I cannot predict whether or not a person of color is going to lowball you, unfortunately, because at the end of the day, it's still a human being with their own constructs and their own mind, and they're going to want to help people out. My experience, very fortunately, is I have had lots of support from the person who would be the would-be supervisor if they were a woman or a woman of color. Where I have been lowballed is when men are the hiring managers. That has been my experience, so I don't have a problem saying that. Race and ethnicity, does the race and ethnicity form at the end of a job application is a basis on which a basic discrimination occurs? So that is actually statistic gathering. I know folks feel afraid to answer those optional questions at the end about their race and ethnicity, or if they have a disability, or if they were in the military. Those are more for the organization to gather their stats so that they are able to present, this is how many people of color have applied, this is how many people with disabilities have applied. That's more for that. They are not supposed to be able to see that information when they are considering you as a candidate. I'm saying supposed to because at the end of the day, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes for sure, but that is not something that's considered in. You'll see even more and more today, people are doing blind anonymous application process in the terms that they'll even remove people's names. Even some companies will remove the education because they're not trying to discriminate based on where you went to school, because they know that that's a privileged opportunity that's going to a prestigious school, and they're trying to strictly look at skills and experience. I always fill out the those optional parts because I know that it helps statistics. So I'm okay. I would say you're okay to fill out the form, the portion of the form that talks about race and ethnicity. How can job seekers find the most inclusive employers to work with? Can you also talk about the role of employee resource groups? Ooh, that's a heavy one, huh, Michelle? And that's a good one too. I just want to make sure if there was like a quick one I could follow up here. Okay. So for the employer, there is actually a huge list of employers. If you Google even diverse and equitable employers, there's a huge list of employers who actually talk the talk. So they don't just have performative DEI statements. They will have policies and procedures in place to ensure that their hiring practices are inclusive, to ensure that once you're an employee, that the environment and the community is safe and inclusive. So that is more so looking at the statements they have on their website. You can ask them if they have their diversity report, and then you can actually see, so that way you can see, well, who's actually making up your company? What is the demographic makeup of your company? So that's a way to find those inclusive employers. So again, if you can Google it, and there will be a list of websites that show you companies that are committed to that. But if you are just going to an individual company and you want to know, you can ask them about the workplace demographic, and that will be one of the key indicators there. And then can you talk about the role of employee resource groups? And so, Michelle, do you mean like affinity groups within the organization? Right. So that's another way to be able to look at a company and say, well, what kind of affinity groups do you have? And this is for anything. This is orientation. This is your race, ethnicity, your gender, and just see what kind of community the company is creating there. And are they putting resources behind that? So we have the, for our Black engineers, but are you giving them money for them to be able to host events, for them to have trainings? What kind of trainings are you providing for the whole organization? So yes, you're absolutely able in an interview process. That's a great question to be able to ask them. What type of affinity groups do you have for your employees, and what type of resources and support do you provide your employees who want to be a part of that affinity group, or who are from different types of communities and background? How do you recommend communicating effectively with family members about the importance of your values and careers, dealing with the pressure to get a job? Yes, I know that is a huge battle right there, and a huge balance as well. I would say that it's important to come with that information, because I think family, especially if you're coming from certain cultural backgrounds, they're focused on how much you're going to make, because they want to make sure that their offspring, their children, is going to be able to take care of themselves, right? It's great to be an artist, but are you going to be able to eat? So an important thing would be really truly to come with statistics. Sounds dull and boring, but if it is such a thing that you feel like a familial obligation, you can be able to say, this is typically how much folks in my desired career field are making. And then this is how much it would cost me to be able to take care of myself and live, in this particular city or location with this particular role. Start perhaps with that approach, because that's the number one familial concern, is how will you be able to take care of yourself? Sometimes for people from collectivists and communal cultures, the next question is, how are you going to be able to take care of us? People, like for me, that village mentality that I mentioned, that's where I'm rooted in. I know a lot of it comes down to, you also need to give back to us. You also need to give back to the village, the community, your family. So how will you intend to do that with this career that you're telling me about? So just assuring them that way, I will be okay. I'll be able to take care of myself. I'll be able to take care of you. And a lot of things are changing these days. So what people assumed, you must have a college degree, you don't necessarily need one. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have one. I'm a huge proponent of higher ed. As you can see, I've got every degree you can possibly have. I work for a university. I am a huge proponent of that. However, I am saying, just to give an analogy, that times have changed. Sometimes you need a certain certification to be able to land a particular type of role, to be able to take care of oneself. I hope that I answered the question there. If not, please let me know. So, okay, great. Yes, good. Gratitude all around. I'm incredibly grateful for that gratitude and appreciative. Thank you so much. Okay, so in most school systems, there are salary scales that we generally follow with integrity. My husband always tells me to try to negotiate anyway. He's not a teacher, but it feels very strange to think about doing this, especially when a school district has an entry cap. Yeah, so if you're referring to the K through 12, it is incredibly different. That structure is very different, and they are pretty much, especially the public K through 12, is bound by a particular salary and scale. And then you can only move up or be promoted or have your years in. They count your age, they count your years in, that goes to retirement. I mean, there are all kinds of factors that come into play for the K through 12 system in the school district. So yes, you can always ask. In that one though, you can ask one time, right? So there are jobs where people go back and forth and back and forth. There are some roles where you should just know it's the one time. Now, if you, in your salary negotiation process, and this is for anything across the board, if they are really stuck in saying this is the final salary, then you need to go beyond that and talk about other perks. Ask about what the benefits are. Ask about, okay, well, do we have a gym membership? Is there daycare? There are all kind of other perks. Okay, then I would like to request some additional vacation time then. Other perks that you can tap into that'll make up for the salary that wasn't preferred. Is there transportation? Can you give me gas money, metro money? What, things like that. So think about those additional perks that will make up for that salary that you didn't get, that you were hoping that you would get. I hope that answers your question, Shannon. My brother's a teacher. As a teacher, my dad was a principal, superintendent. My mom started off in K through 12, and then so I know that system very well, and it can be frustrating. So it's for the school districts, they're following what they have to. Whether or not it's integrity, that's a different thing. that it's more so that they do have those policies in place as they are regulated by the state that they're in. Oh, good, there you are, Shannon. Hi. Okay. I see you nodding. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think that was it. Hopefully I got all the ones from the chat.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good time to just jump in, and so thank you, Rashni. You covered a lot of information and a lot of the different aspects of the career process, the job search process, and how identity plays into that. So I hope people have some more ideas, and I will be sending out a feedback survey, and that'll also include a link. We'll figure out a link to the slides. So I really appreciate your sharing those, and I think you demonstrate the pride in your background and how it shapes who you are and how that makes you good at what you do also. So I think that's a good takeaway for all of us, to really not try to be someone else, but to really own that identity and know how it supports us in the good work that we do. So Rashni, I appreciate your willingness to come and share all this advice with us. Thank you so much. And I'm going to invite people who would like to just stay for 10 minutes. We'll figure out if we want to do breakouts or just have a chance to discuss some of these ideas. So I will end the formal part of the program and then see who would like to stay on. And thanks again to all of you for coming, the good questions, and to Rashni for her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you, everyone.